Every week I'm going to do a fantasy football sit and start video to help out some of you that maybe are having trouble at the last minute trying to set your weekly lineups, trying to determine who you should sit and who you should start, because quite frankly sometimes it can be a very frustrating process and it could be one that leaves you pulling your hair out because you're always second guessing yourself. Now, throughout the season, I'm going to hit on a lot and I'll miss on some. If I missed on some and your team goes like 5-8 and misses the playoffs, and you try to blame me, blame yourself for shitty drafting, blame yourself for not coming up with a better strategy, blame yourself. I'm just here for guidance to assist you from time to time. It's not going to be my fault if you don't make the fantasy playoffs. But if you took some of my advice and you go on to win your fantasy championship, of course, it's only fair that all the credit should come to the good old Schleg Daddy. So I'm going to go quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, who you should sit first, and then who you should start at the position. Quarterbacks to sit. Big Ben against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals gave up more than they should have against the Bears in week number 1, and they looked far from a dominant defense. And the Steelers' offense looked god-awful in week 1 against the Tennessee Titans. I hope you have better options than Big Ben to start at quarterback. Don't start him in week 2. Jay Cutler against the Vikings. In his 2 games against the Vikings last year, he was far from stellar. Cutler looked okay in week 1 against the Bengals. Still not great, but okay. He stepped up and played well when he needed to against a good team like the Bengals. But do I trust Jay Cutler to put together back-to-back really good games? No, I don't. And his recent history against Minnesota hasn't been all that good. Try and find somebody else to start other than Cutler. And honestly, Colin Kaepernick going against the Seattle Seahawks at Quest Field. The bottom line is Kaepernick is an incredible talent, and he put up some phenomenal week 1 numbers against the Green Bay Packers. But as we realize now, the Green Bay Packers defense is once again looking like it's going to be boo-boo this year. They had Clay Matthews dominate and still gave up 34 points to the San Francisco 49ers. That's because their defense isn't that good. The Seattle Seahawks defense is very, very good. Arguably the best, most complete unit in all of the National Football League. I would expect Kaepernick to struggle to put up monster numbers. 3 quarterbacks to start in week 2. Number 1, RGIII going against the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field. The Packers got shredded by Kaepernick in week number 1. I would expect RGIII to recover from a sluggish start in week 1 and have a much better week 2 going to Lambeau. I think the Packers will beat the Redskins, but that doesn't matter in fantasy football. All you care about is a guy putting up big numbers, and I think RGIII will. Michael Vick against the San Diego Chargers in Philadelphia. Vick is still available in a number of leagues as a waiver wire pickup. If you're unsure about your quarterback, or you've got somebody like Big Ben or a Jay Cutler in your week 2 lineup, go get Michael Vick, because this offense that Chip Kelly's implementing is all about tempo and moving the ball at a fast pace and catching defenses out of whack and out of sync and out of sorts, which opens up the game and makes it easier for a quarterback like Michael Vick. And let's face it, the Chargers got shredded pretty good in the second half by Matt Schaub on Monday night last week. And then Terrell Pryor going against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, another quarterback that is on a waiver wire in a lot of leagues. He put up over 100 yards rushing in week number 1, and he had an okay day passing the ball against Indianapolis. He's got to be salivating. And if you're a Terrell Pryor owner, you've got to be salivating too. He's going to go against that boo-boo-ass Jacksonville Jaguars defense. If you have Terrell Pryor, if you have somebody like Big Ben or Cutler in the lineup in front of him, play Terrell Pryor. Running backs you should sit. Lamar Miller from the Dolphins going to Indianapolis. He was boo-boo in week 1. Don't go panicking and cutting him just yet, but I'd make him prove it before you rely on him in your lineup again as a running back flex option or anything like that. Sit Lamar Miller this week. Do yourself a favor. Don't get bit again. Frank Gore at Seattle. If the Green Bay Packers could keep you relatively contained in the running game, imagine what the Seattle Seahawks defense can do to you. Frank Gore did not look that impressive in week 1. A late touchdown obviously helps the fantasy totals, but far from a dominant feature back performance for sure. David Wilson against the Denver Broncos. Do I need to say any more? Maybe David Wilson can put it all together and figure it out and stop fumbling the damn football and playing like a moron. But until he does that, see if you got any better options that you could play. Running backs you should start. Eddie Lacy at Lambeau against the Washington Redskins. Lacy had a so-so debut against San Francisco, but he did score a touchdown. This is the type of game where if the Packers are able to move the ball effectively against a relatively soft Washington Redskins defense, which I think they will be able to, Eddie Lacy could be looking at getting a few goal line touches. And if you get an Eddie Lacy to give you 50, 60 yards and maybe 2 goal line touchdowns, you're looking at 18 points, if not more. That's a pretty damn good fantasy week from one of your running backs, especially if you're deploying him as a flex option. DeAngelo Williams at the Buffalo Bills. The Carolina Panthers can run the ball. I thought DeAngelo Williams looked okay in week number 1 against a very good Seattle Seahawks defense. I'd expect him to do even better week number 2 against a Buffalo defense that got shredded by Shane Vereen in week number 1. So if you've got DeAngelo Williams sitting on your bench, you're unsure of playing him in week 2, he's a featured back right now, play him. Ahmad Bradshaw of the Indianapolis Colts against the Miami Dolphins. Vick Ballard's done for the year. That means Ahmad Bradshaw is the featured back. I don't really need to say much more. If you've got Ahmad Bradshaw on your bench, play him this week. You probably won't regret it. Wide receivers to sit. Let's start with Roddy White of the Atlanta Falcons against the St. Louis Rams. Roddy White was pretty much a decoy in week number 1, which is very painful for people that are Roddy White fantasy owners. Like I have him in a league or two. The bottom line is it's painful when you see a guy that you spent, a third, fourth round pick on, and he's being deployed as a decoy because of a high ankle sprain. That sucks. Problem is you don't want to stick him in your lineup and risk him only getting you 2 catches for like 20 yards. This PPR league or not, it's not going to damn matter. That still sucks. So put Roddy White on the bench this week. If he ends up having a good game, then so be it. It's better to be safe than sorry. Greg Jennings against the Chicago Bears. Christian Ponder at quarterback has been boo-boo to questionable over the past couple of years, and more of the same really in week number 1. And he really didn't go Greg Jennings' way very much at all. Make Greg Jennings prove it to you. Don't play him in week number 2 against a secondary in the Chicago Bears that has arguably the 2 best complete corners in football in Charles Tillman and Tim Jennings. Anquan Boldin of the Niners against the Seattle Seahawks. Again, he's either going to face Richard Sherman or Brandon Browner. 2 stud corners on the outside, 2 big physical stud corners. And when you're looking at Anquan Boldin, he had a monster, phenomenal week number 1. Well, let's not kid ourselves here. He was doing it against a very soft Green Bay Packers defense, in particular a very soft Green Bay Packers secondary. So if you have some better options, take Boldin off your lineup for week number 2. Wide receivers to play. Throwing out some kind of wild cards here. Chris Givens of the St. Louis Rams at Atlanta. When you look at the Rams, they're going to try and throw the ball quite a bit, even though Sam Bradford's not all that great. Somebody's got to catch the ball in that offense. Jared Cook clearly looks like the number 1 option at this point. Until Tavon Austin shows me a little bit more, it looks like Chris Givens is going to, while he's going to get more attention as a number 1 wide receiver, he's also going to get more targets and more opportunities. And I would expect against a relatively soft Falcon secondary in week number 2 that Givens will have a good game. Michael Floyd of the Arizona Cardinals going against the Detroit Lions secondary. The Lions secondary looked a little improved in week 1 compared to the past couple of years. But when you've got Fitzgerald and you've got Michael Floyd, and the Cardinals in week 1 at times seem to give Carson Palmer plenty of time to throw the football, now this is a recipe where you could have Michael Floyd be a very nice wide receiver 3 or flex 1 option for you. And he's going to be available on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues right now. Same with Harry Douglas of the Atlanta Falcons going against the St. Louis Rams. Roddy White's hurt. You need somebody opposite Julio Jones to potentially catch some balls. Harry Douglas could be that guy. I'm not a huge Douglas fan, but he had a solid week 1, and I anticipate he could have a solid week 2 as well. Tight ends to sit in week number 2. Let's start with Jermaine Gresham of the Cincinnati Bengals. With Eifert looking nice, especially in the beginning of the week 1 game against the Bears, it looks like Gresham's going to see some of his opportunities, some of his targets drop throughout the season. And with them facing the Steelers in week number 2, Dalton might not need to throw the ball a ton. As a result, that's going to mean limited opportunities for Jermaine Gresham. Also, Anthony Fasano of the Kansas City Chiefs going against the Dallas Cowboys. Frankly, you should be ashamed of yourself if Anthony Fasano is your fantasy starting tight end. Tight ends to start this week. Kyle Rudolph of the Minnesota Vikings at the Chicago Bears. The bottom line is the Bears have trouble matching up with big physical tight ends, and Kyle Rudolph definitely fits that mold. Christian Ponder doesn't throw to him nearly as much as I think he should sometimes, but I would anticipate Rudolph having a nice day against the Bears because he had a nice day or 2 last year against the team, and I would think Ponder's going to rely a little bit more on his security blanket in week 2. Also, Brett Selleck of the Philadelphia Eagles going against the San Diego Chargers. Selleck had a touchdown catch in week number 1, which a lot of times is all you can ask for out of the tight end position. But if you're struggling at tight end, Selleck is probably available in a number of fantasy leagues. As a result, he makes a good last-minute waiver wire pickup for you to plug into your lineup this coming Sunday.